Hey Caroline, it's Julia, the ex-English major, and today we are going to be going on a blind date, blind luck to the library. So, something that has been a trend that I am seeing online is all creators talking about the same 100 books in every single video. I think that it is amazing that books are becoming popular, that people are finding titles that they like, that people are going out and discussing these popular titles that they really like. But the problem that I'm seeing with that is it feels like we are all reading the same books as each other, and we get into these little pockets of the internet where we are only following creators that enjoy the same style of books and that we are only talking about the same books. And I think that there are some huge benefits to that. But I think that because of that, we are missing out on some great books that might be out there kind of hiding that we would not hear about in other ways. So, in order to kind of combat that, I am going to be combining two of my favorite things, which is gamifying things for chance and visiting the library. And so for that, what I'm going to be doing is I am going to be rolling dice essentially to find a book at the library to pick up and then review for this read. So even if this isn't something that people enjoy, I think that this is something that I want to continue doing on my channel just for myself in order to explore new titles, to find new reads, and hopefully find my next favorite book that I otherwise may not have picked up. And then an added bonus of that is getting to go to the library. I think it's important to be utilizing your local library, helping show that libraries are an important place. Third spaces are dwindling, and libraries are one of the few places that you can go in for free and hang out with your friends and find a new title, and also have access to a lot of materials beyond just books. A lot of times at your local library, it's more than just books, it's more than just ebooks. You have access to so many different things, whether it is cookware or video rentals or things of that nature, even just classes, local classes at your library. I think that libraries are such an underutilized space. And so anything that I can do to be going to the library on top of finding a new read is going to be beneficial for me. So here are the basic setup, the basic rules for this. And I will probably change out some of the categories as I get further into this. But since this is my first time with this gamified blind date at the library, I'll just go ahead and get into some of my rules. So, what I am going to be doing is I have 3 different categories here on a piece of paper. They are already predetermined, and I will probably add in some B-roll as I'm talking or next to me on the side, so that way you can see what is going on here in more detail. But I essentially have 3 predetermined categories, and I'm going to roll my dice to see what I'm going to pick. And my goal is to have all 3, if I can find it, categories that fit my next read that I'm going to go and find at my local library. So, of the categories, I have last name of the author, primary color in the book, or something that, on the cover, on the spine, this color is very prominent. And then the third thing is something on the cover. So with my D6, I will be rolling for my last name. And so my categories are A through D, E through H, I through L, M through P, Q through T, and U through Z. And so whatever I roll, I have to find the book needs to be written by someone of that last name. For colors, that's my D8, and so it will determine a prominent color on the book. I'm not going to go read through all of the examples, but some could be red, yellow, gray, purple, black. And so when I go through and roll, that needs to be a prominent color either on the spine or on the cover. And then my D20 will be the something on the cover. So an element of the cover that needs to be there. So some examples, again, since I have 20, I will not read all of them for you because that would take forever. But something that it could have is it needs to have a tree on it, it needs to have stars on it, it needs to be maximalist, it needs to have a sword, a flower, a landscape, a building. So all of those are something that needs to be present in the cover. And so my rules are I'm going to hopefully find something that has all three. At minimum, though, it needs to have two. So if I simply cannot find something with my combination, I will be able to trim one. My goal is to go ahead and find something at the library that has all three. And another rule for myself is I cannot pick a title that I am seeing often online. So if there is a book that either I'm seeing quite often or it's a book that I have already heard of, that I've already added to my TBR, those will be disqualified. Maybe I will pick it up on the side. We will see. But for this video review, whenever I pick up my book, it cannot be something that either I am seeing often on apps online or that is something that is already on my radar. The goal of this is to pick up something that is completely new to me and have fun that way and explore a new title that I otherwise would not have picked. So without further ado, let me go ahead and roll on in here. My first one is going to be my D6 to figure out the last name of my author. Okay, so I have picked up a 6. And so that means that my author needs to have the last name U through Z. All right, next I will have my D8 in order to determine my color that is prominent on the book. We have another 6, which means that it needs to be gray. Alrighty, and then my final D20 is going to be an element that needs to be present on the cover. And we have 5, which means flower. So a flower needs to be somewhere on my cover. So I will go ahead and explore some titles, probably run a few errands, and then I will check back in with you when I have a book that hopefully has the author with the last name beginning U through Z, has gray as a prominent color throughout the book, and has a flower somewhere on the cover. All right, and we are back. It has been a few hours for me, and it has been just a few seconds for you. Thank you to the magic of editing software and putting 2 videos together. The library that is closest to me is pretty small, so I was a little worried there that I wouldn't be able to find a title that had all 3 of my categories. And then just at the last moment here, we ended up finding one that fit perfectly. So especially on the spine, we have the author's last name begins with a Z. It's got a gray spine and there is a flower right there at the top. So this one just had to come home with me for this read. We have Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. I have not heard of this book. And watch, it will end up being some extremely popular book that everyone has heard of. The author's last name was a little bit familiar. This book came out in the 60s. Did not look up anything else about this book because wanted to go into it blind. So let me go ahead and get into the summary of the story so that way we know what we're getting into, and then I will go ahead and read this and come back with my thoughts afterwards for the good, the bad, and the ugly. Hopefully more good than bad or ugly. So for the summary of this, again, this is one of those hardcover books, so we've got summary on both sides of the flaps, so bear with me here. But it says, the novel takes place long after the death of Earth, on a planet settled by human colonists. There, the original settlers have recreated the ancient Hindu pantheon, bestowing upon themselves, by means of mutation and technology which they deny all others on the planet, godlike powers and godlike immortality, and they rule their world with godlike arrogance and caprice. Each with his or her own aspect and attributes, the gods rule. Brahma, the creator, Shiva, the lord of chaos, Kali, the goddess of destruction, Yama, the lord of death, Krishna, lord of lust, and others constructed from memories of ancient earth and its theologies. Only one opposes them, one of the few who rejected the prerequisites of godhood, believing that the ordinary mortals should be freed from the tyranny of their self-appointed deities. He has many names: Mahatsaman, Siddhartha, Binder of Demons, the Enlightened One, Buddha, but he prefers to be called Sam. Once before, Sam had fought against the gods, a great battle so terrible the sun itself hid its face from the slaughter, and he lost. To have him die would have made a martyr of him, so his enemies gave him nirvana, projecting his Atman, his soul, into the great magnetic clouds circling the planet. But now he has been reincarnated and brought back by those who have kept the flames of revolution alight these long years. It can only be he, charismatic, almost all-knowing, and brilliantly Machiavellian in his scheming, who can lead the battle against the gods once more. In the course of his struggle, Sam will find allies as well as enemies among the gods, will unleash the demons, the planet's indigenous sapients he had previously bound, and will be forced to confront his own fears and desires as he wrestles with the demands of his conscience. So that is the summary that is printed here for Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. Again, I will go ahead and jump on into this, and I will be back in a little bit here, probably in a day or two. We'll see how long this takes me, with my thoughts and opinions for Lord of Light. Alrighty, and we are back. I have finished Lord of Light, and I am back here with some of my thoughts, my opinions, the strengths, the weaknesses, things of that nature. So I finished this book last night, and I have stayed away from other reviews, other summaries, other things of that nature for this book because I wanted to come in here with some of my first thoughts, my first opinions. I will let you know right off the gate that this is a book that is not you're not going to be spoon-fed in this book. This is a book that is very dense, very difficult to read. And so maybe not difficult to read, but this is a book where there's a lot of things happening. It's a book that you are not being handheld, you are not being explained. And so honestly, this is one of those books that I think it helps you, especially if you are new to this genre, if this is something, even if you're not just new to this genre, but you've been out of this genre for a while. I think that this is a book that could benefit from either multiple reads, really chewing on this, or having someone who you know who has recommended this book kind of talk you through it, maybe having someone who is a little bit more knowledgeable than you to discuss this with, to read this with. This is one of those books that I feel like you simultaneously need a map and a chart to understand fully what's happening when it comes to these huge time skips, and characters have other names. There's epithets, there is religious straight up, I didn't even want to say religious allusions. It's straight up copied from religious texts, Eastern religion in this story. And so it is helpful, I would imagine, to have multiple reads. And I simply did not do that for this book. I read it one time. So I am going to hop on into a summary. I will say that the summary is it's impossible for the summary not to contain spoilers because of how the book is structured. You essentially are dropped right into the middle of things, and you are not learning some of the background lore until the last chapter in some cases. So I'm going to come here and kind of put it in a little bit more of a linear way for you. So I will say that, at least for me, I think I may have benefited from a summary, from some of this background knowledge, just in order to have it. But if you are somebody who does not want spoilers, you want to go into this blind, completely respect that. I did the same thing going into this as well. So I will put a little timestamp over here. And so you can just make sure that you that you skip ahead until we're at this spot, and that you can go ahead and have your spoiler-free read and just jump into what I thought were strengths and weaknesses before deciding to pick up this book. So again, this is your warning to skip until my timestamp here. All right, so now that those people have moved on into the future of the video, we have these small little chapters. Each chapter is essentially a vignette that takes place in over a huge timeline. So the chapters are mostly linear, except for the first chapter is essentially like the second to last thing that happens. So you start with the ending, essentially, and then you flash back an unknown amount of time to how we got here. And then the final chapter is essentially the culmination, the end. Some of the context of what is happening in this story is you are on a distant planet in some time in the distant future. It's a little bit unclear what happened to Earth. If I had to give a estimate overall, I think that I probably picked up on my first read a solid 85% of the story, simply because I know already that there are religious allusions, pieces that went over my head because I don't know much about Eastern religion, as well as it is written in such a way that you need to read it many, many, many times in order to squeeze out everything in the book if you don't have someone walking you through it, coaching you through it, explaining everything for you. I think that this book benefits from having a super fan sit you down and tell you about it. But we are in this distant future world. We are on another planet, and we don't necessarily know 100% about what happened to Earth. All that we know is that there was some sort of vague destruction, and we have these humans coming to this new planet and essentially colonizing the planet. And these people, they have insane amounts of technology to the point where you have so much technology that it's essentially magic. And so because they have all of this technology, they have essentially made themselves gods on this planet. And they have done so much that they have taken on aspects of the Hindu pantheon and you are using their technology in order to kind of have dominion. So they essentially are these godlike beings, and they rule over this planet and its people in almost like a fascist dictatorship type way. So because they have so much technology, they are limiting access and limiting progress for the people on this planet. And this book takes place over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They have been doing this for so long that it is essentially taken as religious fact that these are the gods. For the people of this planet, these characters, these people, the humans who came, are godlike. And it has been this way for so long that nobody questions it. Except for we have someone who does, and his name is Sam. And so you are following Sam as he kind of decides to take down this structure. He is essentially fighting for the everyman, and he does not want to limit progress. In this world, we have these technologically advanced gods, but the people are left without basic necessities. There is no running water. Eyeglasses don't exist. We have a lot of disease, and Sam is one of these first people. He is the only one who, at this point in the story, has not made himself a god. And so he is essentially deciding how he is going to take down these gods. One of the reasons that this book takes place over so much time is, like I said, we have this vast technology. And so these gods are able to download their consciousness. It's a little bit hand wavy in the specifics of it, but they've downloaded their consciousness and they can upload it into another body, another being. And so these people are going through, and you've got some of them who the person who is occupying Brahma at this time has downloaded herself into the body of a man. And so we're essentially we have different names for all of these people. They have their God name and they have the name that they originally were. And they're in different bodies, they're in different forms. And so in each chapter, you essentially don't know necessarily which character is which until you are introduced to it. And this reincarnation is something that is common on the planet, but these gods are in control of who is reincarnated and as what. So a system that they have set in place is they have these prayomats that are essentially a way to pay for prayer, and all of the people will put tokens into these prayomats, and they are essentially praying and giving fealty to these gods. And when it is time for them to be reincarnated, the gods will use technology to scan their brain and to essentially decide how and what they will be reincarnated as. So they call it karma, but essentially it is if you have not prayed enough, if you have thought things or done things that are against the gods, then what they will do as punishment is they will put your consciousness into a body that maybe is sick, is weak, is easier to control, or sometimes what they'll do is they'll put you into a body of some form of animal. There are, in specifically this story, there are people who are turned into birds, there are people who are turned into monkeys or apes, there are people who are turned into dogs. And so essentially one way that they are keeping control of others is making sure that they are doing this fealty to them and that they are finding those who may be part of an uprising or who maybe aren't following the things that they would like, that they have some control over them in that way and kind of make sure that the next body that they will be inhabiting is not as favorable. And in that way, they kind of keep this chokehold on these people, keep them from progressing technologically so that way they can kind of keep their stranglehold of power over them. And so Sam sees this, and Sam is absolutely against this. And so though he has been offered godhood many times, again, these are the people that he came to this planet with. So there is a huge history with these people. A lot of the gods want him to join them, but he not only doesn't want to join them, but he decides that what he's going to do is he's going to fight this religion with religion. And so as his crewmates, as his first realm of humans have fashioned themselves as gods, what he is going to do is he fashions himself as a Buddha and uses Buddhism to fight Hinduism, essentially. He uses Buddhist teachings, he builds a following, he goes through and is using this religion to fight this other religion. His aim is to kind of eradicate these godlike people in order to allow progress to happen. What's very interesting about specifically Sam and his religion that he has built is he has made it very clear to, not to his followers, but one-on-one with some of his confidants, he does not believe in what he is teaching. He ultimately has picked Buddhism as a sort of scapegoat for what he is doing, but he doesn't believe in it. He is saying it's all a lie. But then you're watching as some of his followers genuinely believe his teachings and genuinely come to enlightenment. And so it's kind of this back and forth about religion as a tool, religion as a means of controlling people, but it's not necessarily all about religion is bad, bad, bad. I don't think that Roger Zelazny is going through and is saying he's anti-religion. He is simply using this as a allegory for how religion can be used to control groups of peoples. And I think that a really good, interesting quote about it is something that I will read for you here. But essentially in this quote, Sam is discussing how he could have picked any religion. This book specifically touches most heavily on Eastern religion. There is brief mentions of Christianity as well, but you do not come away from this book thinking, oh, Eastern religion bad. It is essentially any religion can be used for this. And let me go ahead and I'll pull up a quote that I think really accurately shows this. So in this part of the story here, we are with Taraka, who is essentially a demon, and he is one of the original inhabitants of the planet, and he is discussing with Sam at the end of the book, trying to figure out which religion is correct. So he starts off with, Sam, what? Which one is the right way? Huh? You're asking me that? How should I know? Mortals call you Buddha. That is only because they are afflicted with language and ignorance. No, I have looked upon your flames and name you Lord of Light. You bind them as you bound us. You loose them as you loosed us. Yours was the power to lay a belief upon them. You are what you claim to be. I lied. I never believed in it myself, and I still don't. I could just have easily chosen another way. Say, Nariti's religion. Only crucifixion hurts. I might have chosen one called Islam, only I know too well how it mixes with Hinduism. My choice was based on calculation, not inspiration, and I am nothing. So in this, we have Sam, and he's using a religion he doesn't believe in to fight a religion that he also doesn't believe in. He is just using the tools of what has come before him, and if religion worked so well for the first peoples who crafted their society after Hinduism, he is going to pick another religion that is accessible to him to fight it. So it's kind of an equal opportunity. All religion can be used for your own personal political motivations. And I think that was a really interesting piece of the story, and it's a huge tenet of the story. I think that he did a really, really good job of showing how religion can be calculated and can be used to further your own aims, while not necessarily saying all religion is bad. It's just that all religion has the potential for bad. So that is essentially my summary. Again, I didn't go into too many spoilers, but wanted to make sure that you had some context if you want some of this context, since it is such a bit of a dense read, and since it is such a bit of a complex read that could benefit from having some background information, especially if you don't want to go in and reread this multiple times. Some of the positives about this book, about this story, about Lord of Light, is I think that this is a really, really interesting structured story. So this whole story is written like a religious text. It is very reminiscent of going in and reading passages from other religious texts. It's not necessarily very narrative. It does not have, it has a structure, but it doesn't have your stereotypical literary structure of you are going to come on in once upon a time. It is very much written like you are reading a religious text. And that was very clearly intentional. And I think that was fantastic. It is that religious aspect of it where we are using religion to fight religion, and the whole book is structured like a religious text. I think that is really, really interesting. Very well done. Huge positive. When there are things that I would point to about saying, hey, this work could be quote unquote brilliant, that is one of the things that I would be pointing to for it first and foremost. Another piece of it that is very interesting, and something that personally I kind of geek out about, is I really, really like the fact that a lot of these characters, they are going through reincarnations, so they have different names, but then they also have these religious epithets for it. So one of the things that a lot of my background when it comes to things that I have read is I have read a lot of Greco-Roman mythology, less so Eastern mythology, but I could imagine that they would have something similar, or potentially, simply because when it comes to storytelling and oral storytelling, there is this tradition of epithets, but we have a lot of characters who not only have different names, but they have a religious title that goes with it. So in this story, we have characters who aren't always referred to as their name. They're not always referred to as their godhood name. Sometimes they have another name that is a phrase that explains their godness, and you have to know that way. So pulling away from this book and using some of these Greco-Roman ones that you'd see is in a lot of, for example, Greco-Roman myths, you will have gray-eyed Athena or Pallas Athena, and you sometimes will have someone being the gray-eyed one, the Pallas one. And so you have to know that gray-eyed is Athena, that Pallas is Athena. And in this book as well, we are seeing some of that too, where we have characters who have their original name that they came to this planet with. We have their godhood name. And then we also have these epithets or these titles that are describing them. And so it's really interesting that way. And it kind of adds to that religious illusion. But that is a strength. I will say that some of that could tie into some of the weaknesses that I will get into in a bit here, but I would say that it is very interesting that they have that, and it kind of lends some credibility to this being a religious text, which is what I think that Roger is trying to go for here. So I think that is really well done. I personally really liked that as somebody who just picked up on that and was like, oh wait, that's something really cool he's doing. I think that that was very, very, very cool. And then another positive, so we had the religious aspect of it. Another positive, I think, is the world building, just simply from a entertainment point of view. I think that it is really, really cool. So we have, like I mentioned in the summary, again, I will gloss over this really quickly, but the structure with the prayomats and how that feeds into reincarnation, I thought that that was extremely interesting, extremely well done. I thought it was very cool how we are showcasing the power disparity when it comes to technology and progress between these gods and these normal people. I always like when a book decides to take a chance and do something a little bit wacky and weird. And I would say that this book definitely takes that chance, definitely gets into that wacky and weird. And so I thought that that was very well done. I thought that that was very engaging. If you are going to be able to craft anything you want, I love when people throw in everything in the kitchen sink and they really lean into it and really decide, hey, let's do something strange. I always really like that. And so I thought that was something that was very well done. And then a final strength that I picked out from this book is this book, though it is crafted like a religious text, we've got kind of almost archaic language here. Despite having some of that, it was weirdly funny, and it was almost my exact type of humor where I don't necessarily like always the kind of the things that make books funny in a lot of modern books where they're using internet speak or slang. If a book sounds like it was a 1 or 2 liner from Tumblr, for me, that's just not always my cup of tea. I think it has to be done really sparingly. And this book is funny in kind of the way that I enjoy, where it's that dry, witty, almost punny humor. So I pulled out a couple quotes here that I think kind of exemplify this. Again, this isn't going to get into too many spoilers. I'll give a little bit of context for these quotes, but I think it really exemplifies both kind of the dryness that I'm talking about with some of the, both the wording and then also just kind of these funny little quippy, witty one-liners, 2-liners. So for my first one here, so here we are, and in this excerpt here, we have just taken Sam, we have just downloaded his consciousness from the ether, where it is kind of being placed up in the atmosphere, and his consciousness has been downloaded into a new body, and those who downloaded him into this new body are trying to figure out where they want to hide him, because they obviously, the gods who banished his consciousness out there, they're not going to want him back. So they have to figure out where to hide him while he gathers his strength, while he returns into being capable to have a new body, etc. So he needs some time to recoup and relearn what it is to be placed in a body after he has just been essentially a consciousness floating in the ether. So here we have the two conspirators who are trying to figure out what they want to do with him and where they want to hide him. So, "I've a better idea," said she. "Know that under a mortal name am I the mistress of the palace of Kama in Kaipur." "The fornicatorium, madam?" She frowned. "As such it is often known to the vulgar, and do not call me madam in the same breath. It smacks of an ancient jest." And then later in that same conversation here, she says this: "Being a god is one of the oldest professions in the world. It is only fitting, therefore, that we fallen ones take umbrage within the pale of another venerable tradition." So kind of that play on words there between prostitution being the oldest tradition or the oldest profession, and also being a god being the oldest profession. It's kind of that witty punniness of calling her a madam, saying that, you know, she's got the oldest tradition, things of that nature. So I thought that was kind of funny, weirdly funny in a book that, you know, is so dense, and then there's just these one or two liners. For this next quote, this one I almost kind of chuckled out loud for. I thought it was kind of funny. I thought it was really interesting. He essentially sets up, the author sets up this huge multi-page scene. So we are following Sam, and he has kind of pissed off Brahma, and he knows that he's pissed off Brahma, and he also is at the point where his body is old, and so it's time for him to be re-downloaded into a new body, and he knows that he's made Brahma angry, and so though Brahma has told him that he will be reincarnated, he doesn't quite trust it. So what he decides to do is he finds someone named Shan who is going to pretend to be him and kind of take his place in line for this reincarnation. And because he doesn't trust Brahma at this time, he knows that he has pissed Brahma off enough that Brahma will probably put him into some sort of body that is either ill or weak, or an animal, and so he is paying this body double to take it for him, so that way he can thwart Brahma's plans of doing so, if that's the case. And it is the case, because they essentially try to download him into the body of an epileptic. And this is kind of what's funny about it. Again, it's I laughed. Maybe that says something about me. I thought it was funny. So it says, "Siddhartha," cried Shan. Oh, and by the way, Siddhartha is another word for Sam. So like I said, we have these huge multiple lists of names, and in this incarnation body, Siddhartha is Sam. So, "Siddhartha," cried the Shan, "who is this one who you dare address by the name of your master? I am Siddhartha, binder of..." With that, he threw his head back and his words gurgled in his throat. And then the fit hit the Shan. So we've got the whole shit hit the fan, fit hit the Shan thing. I thought it was really funny. Again, it's weird, random, funny one-liners, funny little stupid jokes that are thrown in here in this text that is so heavy, and then you just have shit hit the fan jokes. All right, and then this very last one that I am going to get into, again, just to kind of give you a bit of a taste of some of the humor in this, so that way you know whether or not it's going to be funny for you or whether or not this is something that you want to skip. Again, I liked it, but I know that reading is subjective, and so this might not be something that lands with you. But for this one, we have a poet who has been reincarnated as a bird, and he, in his bird form, meets Sam, and he is so excited because he's a poet who his life's work is writing these poems about Sam, about the Lord of Light, and so he is just absolutely fangirling over meeting his idol, essentially. And so he's in a bird form, and this is what he says. He says, "I have seen the Lord of Light at last, of whom I wrote long ago. Always dying, never dead. Always ending, never ended. Loathed in darkness, clothed in light. He comes to end a world, as morning ends the night. These lines were writ by Morgan Free, who shall, the day he dies, see this prophecy." The bird ruffled his feathers and then was still. "I am pleased, bird, that you have had a chance to see many things," said Sam, "and that within the fiction of your metaphor you have achieved a certain satisfaction. Unfortunately, poetic truth differs considerably from that which surrounds most of the business of life. "Hail, Lord of Light," said the bird, and sprang into the air. As he rose, he was pierced through by an arrow shot from a nearby window by one who hated jackbirds. Sam hurried on. So we have this bird, and he's absolutely freaking out that he was able to, in one of his bodies, meet the Lord of Light. And he wrote this poem, and the poem is all about how one day, how amazing Sam is, and one day he will get to see him on the day that he dies. And Sam is kind of placating him. He's meeting this guy who is kind of fanning a little too hard, and he's like, it's good to see you too, buddy. And then immediately after meeting him, the bird dies, just like he said he was going to in the poem. And Sam just kind of walks on by like that's a regular Tuesday. So I thought that was kind of funny. Again, those are just a little taste into some of the humor in this book, so that way you can decide for yourself if it's something that's going to land for you, or if maybe this is something that you won't find very funny, since it is something that this humor, in my mind, was a bit of a break. You can know if it's going to be enough of a break for you to pick this up, or if it's going to have enough of a draw for you to want to pick it up. All right, so now that I have gotten into some of the positives, here are some of the negatives that I found in this book. This book is really, really dense. It is written like it's a religious text, and I could see that is something that was very intentional and that the author could be using to weed out who is right for this book, right? Because it is so dense that you are only really going to want to get through it if it's something that you think you would enjoy. And so in so doing, he's kind of narrowing his base a little bit of readers for people who would get it. So I am not saying that it is totally a bad thing to write something that isn't accessible to the masses, but in my opinion, this book is not very accessible, especially not very accessible to kind of your modern reader. And so just know going into it that if you do pick this up, this is going to be a very dense read. It's going to be a bit of a headache-inducing read. And it is a read that I think would benefit from multiple run-throughs. The first one just to figure out your kind of basic structure of the plot and basic structure of what's happening. And then a subsequent read to kind of dig into some of the meat, to kind of dig into some of the pieces that maybe went over your head. And so this is one of those ones that you would want to read many, many, many times. And the first time you read it, you might not fully enjoy it. And so I want to go in there throwing that as a negative, as to from a sheer fun factor, I can pick this up and feel like I am getting everything that the author wanted me to get out of it in my first read. This is not going to be a book that you are going to be able to get every single thing out of in the first read. And it's not necessarily going to be a book where you're going to step away from it thinking, wow, I had a fun time. Yes, there are funny bits, but I would not say that this is a fun read. Not that it's not an enjoyable read, but you're definitely going to feel like you have to put in a lot of work for it. And so I want to kind of put that as a weakness, because I feel like, in my own personal opinion, I really respect and admire authors who can do what Zelazny is doing here with this dense philosophy, talking about religion, talking about politics. But I personally prefer authors who can do that and still make it an enjoyable read, still make it an accessible read without watering it down too much. I don't think that we need to spoon feed our readers every single time, but I personally enjoy a book that feels a little bit more accessible, and this book is not very accessible. Another piece that kind of helps make it feel not very accessible is the specific story structure of this. So it is a little bit difficult to be thrown into, on that first chapter, thrown into almost the ending and you don't know what's happening and you get no context, and then to be in the next chapter thrust back in time, and there's no indication of where you are at in time and of how many years it has been between chapters. And so kind of being thrown into almost the end of the story, and then in the next bit you have some very similar characters, some characters who were in that first chapter in different bodies with different names, and then also having completely different characterizations because it is the beginning of the story now in chapter 2. And so where a character has grown from chapter 1, which is almost the end of their arc, to chapter 2, which is the very beginning, it is a little bit of whiplash, and you don't have the context of where you are at, what you are doing. And so, like I discussed in the summary, if you don't have all of that context because you are getting it piece by piece, and this story is not quite linear, it is very, very difficult to kind of understand what is happening. Having a story that is mostly linear, but then chapter 1 would be the second to last chapter if it were to be fully linear, and you don't have all of the context of the world yet in this first chapter, I could see how it would be something that a person would DNF. And I will be so honest here, if this wasn't for a video, I probably would have DNF'd it after chapter 1, and it takes a lot for me to DNF because I usually need to know what happens in the story, and I was just extremely confused in that first bit, and so I would caution you on that. If you want to push through, please do. I think overall it was worth it to have pushed through, but those first few chapters where you're trying to orient yourself in this world and where you're at in time and in space, it is a little bit of a slog. And so know that going in, that you are going to have to put in some work. And I applaud an author for making a reader put in some work, because especially in today's day and age, I feel like sometimes authors are a little too spoon-feedy and are giving too much context, but I think a little bit more context would be warranted and would benefit the modern reader, or at least myself. If I'm putting myself as the modern reader, I could have benefited from a little bit more hand-holding, just a tiny bit in the beginning, just a little bit more context, throwing some of the really important bits in at the final chapter when it is, this many pages. This edition is 250 pages, but when it takes me 220 of 250 pages to get really important pieces that would help me understand the first few pages, I think that's just, I would have liked a little bit more. So know that going in there. Another shortcoming that could be me and my own ignorance, and I am fully owning my own ignorance, but I really do not know much at all about the Hindu pantheon and things of that nature. I am also not a practicing Buddhist. I'm not somebody who is overly familiar with the teachings and the Buddhist philosophy, and so I could imagine, and again, this is me imagining, so if you are well versed in Hinduism or in Buddhism, please come in the comments if you've read this book. Let me know how accurate it is. Simply from my own ignorance and from my own acknowledgement of my shortcomings and my knowledge gaps in this, I could see a world where this could be a little bit inaccurate because of how much there is in here and how much it relies on you knowing the teachings and knowing the philosophies and knowing the history of some of these big religions. And I got little inclinations here. And again, this is the pot calling the kettle black. But I got some inclinations here that there is potential for this book to have been written by someone who also may be ignorant to those religions. And I could be completely off base. Parts of it felt a little bit like when someone takes one class on Eastern religion and then decides that they know everything because they know more than the everyman, and then decide to write a book. Specifically when it comes to the Hinduism, I got less of my spidey senses, so to speak, tingling when it comes to the Buddhism. Maybe it's because I am slightly more familiar with Buddhism than I am Hinduism as well, but I'm wondering if, because there were so many members of this Hindu pantheon and there are so many references and so many pieces here, it almost feels a little bit like when somebody has a very baseline knowledge of something, and then because they have studied it more than the everyman but nowhere near enough to go ahead and base a whole book around it, it kind of felt a little bit like that. It felt a little bit like that one guy who took 2 semesters of Eastern religion and then decided to write a big book, pretending like he knew everything there was about it. And I am solely basing that off vibes. So if you have read this book and you know a lot about Hinduism and Buddhism, please correct me in the comments. I didn't go in and research this because I wanted to come on here and give my own opinions without some of the influence that maybe would be others, maybe some super fans out there or somebody who has actually studied these. But just from vibes alone, it seemed like there could be that. And that criticism could be completely unfounded. And please educate me if it is unfounded. But I got a little bit of some spidey senses tingling when it came to maybe this book might not be wholly accurate to Hinduism or to Buddhism. And so I wanted to put that as a weakness, because coming away from it, he does rely on you to know so much. And as someone who really doesn't know much at all, I think that could be a bit of a red flag, and that there could be some mischaracterizations there happening, and I just don't know enough to say one way or another. I wanted to list that as a potential negative, but could be a positive if it turns out that after some researching that this is wholly accurate and really is a good characterization of the Hindu pantheon and of Buddhism. But wanted to throw that in their negatives simply because I felt there was a hunch telling me that it might be pretty inaccurate, and it's relying on you to know whether or not. And since this is a book for a Western audience who maybe doesn't know a lot about Eastern religion, it rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. So some final thoughts here about Lord of Light. I thought that it was kind of middle of the road. There were some things about it that I really, really enjoyed, and there were some things about it that I really didn't like. I will say that this book is not going to be for everyone, and that this book is dense in places, it is dry in places, it has some dry humor, which could be a benefit or a negative. For me, that was a positive, but I know a lot of people in my life who this would not be a book that I would recommend for them. And this is a book that I feel like would benefit from additional reading, multiple rereads, and having some background knowledge in Eastern religion. This first review may be in ignorance, and this first review would benefit from outside readings and multiple rereads. but I would not say that it was enjoyable enough to make me want to read it again immediately afterward. This is something that maybe one day I will pick up and try to get more out of it. And I know that there is more to be gotten out of this book, but read number one, it wasn't so enjoyable that I am feeling compelled to do it immediately afterwards. I read this book last night. I'm coming online here and filming this the next day after my thoughts have been slightly organized in my handy dandy notes here, but I am by no means an expert. So if you are interested in a science fiction book that has very heavy religious allegories, specifically ones that deal with Eastern religion, if that is a passion for you, or if you are really into kind of this hippie movement, peace and love, late 60s sci-fi, psychedelic type sci-fi, if that is your jam and you have not picked this book up, would highly recommend. I could see this book having a lot of super fans. I could see this book being touted as a masterwork. Just me, myself, with the point I'm at in my life, I am probably not this book's intended audience. So if you think that this book sounds great for you, or if you are specifically, I think that this book would be fantastic for people who really like Dune, but specifically about Dune are really into the religious commentary and discussions of how religion can be used to control groups of people and the positives and negatives of religion. Definitely pick this up, as if that is your favorite part of the Dune series. If you are looking to branch out into other books that have that specific Venn diagram to it, I would pick this up. Just know that it's not going to be quite as I didn't think Dune was the most accessible on first read, but this book is less accessible in my opinion than Dune. But if you are interested in a book that deals with that, I would say pick this up. If you are interested in kind of that intersection where technology becomes like magic as well, definitely pick this up. For me, I would imagine that maybe I'll come back to it in the future. I'm sure I'm missing things in this book. But this is one of those middle of the road books. I'm not going to say that this is a new favorite. I'm not going to say that this book is for everyone. If you are really interested in kind of this psychedelic fantasy, if you are really, really interested in Hinduism or Buddhism, or you have a lot of knowledge of them, this might be the book for you. But I think that is my opinion on The Lord of Light. It needs a reread, but I also don't know if I enjoyed it enough for an immediate reread. So those are my thoughts of Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. Again, this is the first book in my series that I'm going to be doing as a regular on this channel, where I essentially go in and have to pick a title that I have not heard of from my library that fits in a certain category. So I would feel this was a success. This wasn't something that I hated, so I thought it was a good time. And definitely I will be doing more of this in the future, more of this kind of letting chance pick my books. And if you are a Roger Zelazny fan, please in the comments recommend me some other titles, maybe ones that if he has a book that relies on less of a background of Eastern religion. I think that there were a lot of really, really good things that were done in this book. And I think that there was a lot of kind of his humor I gelled with. I see the vision of what he was trying to do, even if I don't fully have enough context for it to feel like this was absolutely a piece of genius. So if he has other titles that are kind of this same brand of slightly dry humor, epic scale when it comes to time and things of that nature, please recommend some of those in the comments. Just, I think that when it came to the prerequisite knowledge of some Eastern religion, that went over my head a little bit. So if he has other titles, please give me some recommendations. Would love to hear them. Or if after hearing my pros and cons of this book, you think that there are other titles that I would enjoy, maybe not by Zelazny, but by other authors, please leave some of those in the recommendations as well. Would love to kind of pick some of those up and dive into some books that maybe I haven't heard of, or that maybe I wouldn't immediately be drawn to in order to find my next new favorite read. But yeah, that is everything. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.